Dusk softly blankets a quiet suburban town where life flows predictably, and residents are accustomed to the familiar rhythm of their days. On an uneventful evening patrol, white police officer Richard Grayson sits behind the wheel of his squad car. This is his turf, a place where he knows every street, house, and even most of the cars parked along the curbs. Tonight, like many others, promise to be calm. No calls, no disturbances, no incidents. But as Grayson drives down a silent street, his attention is drawn to a car that immediately sparks suspicion. It's a sleek black sedan gleaming under the dim streetlights. The vehicle's polished exterior and darkened windows stand out against the aging, modest cars of local residents. His eyes catch the license plate, which boldly displays the phrase, "Time for change." Grayson narrows his eyes and slows the car to a halt. His demeanor shifts into one of alertness. "Whose car is this? It doesn't belong here," he mutters to his partner, a young and relatively inexperienced officer named Tom. "Think it's a big deal? Maybe someone's just visiting," Tom offers cautiously, sensing the tension in Grayson's tone. "Too flashy," Grayson replies curtly, ignoring the suggestion. For him, such details mean more than just an unusual parked car. Reaching for the radio, he calls into the station to run the plates. A few moments later, the system provides a name: Antonio Harris. The name rings no bells for Grayson, but something about it sets him on edge. "Not a local, that's for sure," he concludes, silently forming assumptions. A black sedan, an unusual slogan on the plate, and a name he considers out of place for the area. It all begins to paint a picture in his mind. "Owner's name is Antonio Harris. You know anyone by that name around here?" he asks Tom, as if seeking validation. "No, but that doesn't mean anything," Tom responds hesitantly. Grayson isn't listening. In his mind, the dots have already connected. A non-local owner means potential trouble. "Let's go take a look," he says abruptly, stepping out of the patrol car. Tom reluctantly follows, his steps hesitant. As Grayson approaches the car, his suspicions deepen. He inspects the exterior, his flashlight sweeping over the windows, the rims, and the rear of the vehicle. His gaze fixes on the trunk, where faint scratches mar the area around the lock. "See this, Tom?" he says, gesturing at the marks. "Looks like someone tried to force it open. Or maybe the owner's hiding something." "Could just be old damage," Tom suggests weakly, but Grayson has already made up his mind. His expression hardens as he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a lockpick tool, a standard item he always keeps on hand. For him, this is routine, a simple precaution, something he justifies as necessary police work. "Sir, are you sure this is legal?" Tom ventures, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Listen, this is my patrol, and I'm in charge. If you want to learn something, watch and stay out of the way," Grayson snaps, entirely focused on his task. The street remains quiet, yet the stillness is heavy with tension. The lock clicks softly, and the trunk lid lifts just a fraction. Grayson feels a brief surge of satisfaction, proof he believes that his instincts were correct, but he has no idea that his actions are about to set off a chain of events far beyond his control. The trunk creaks open slightly, and Richard Grayson feels a rush of vindication. "We'll see what they're hiding," he thinks, his confidence swelling. But before he can pull the trunk open completely, there's a sharp metallic click, a noise that instantly unsettles him. Without warning, a burst of white vapor shoots out from the trunk, enveloping his face. At first, Grayson doesn't realize what's happening. The gas stings his eyes and nostrils with a sharp intensity, and within seconds, his throat burns and his vision blurs. "Gas!" he coughs, stumbling backward and clawing at his face. His lungs seize with every ragged breath as he collapses to his knees, writhing in pain. "Sir, are you okay?" shouts Tom, his young partner, who stands several feet away, frozen in shock. He hesitates before taking a step forward, only to be pushed back by the cloud of lingering irritant. Grayson can't answer. His mind is consumed with the burning in his throat and eyes, his body revolting against the assault of the tear gas. He's gasping, choking, and wiping furiously at his face with his sleeve, though nothing alleviates the pain. Nearby, the quiet street begins to stir. A few curious neighbors emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. From a distance, they see the unusual sight of a white police officer sprawled on the ground, visibly distressed. "What's going on over there?" murmurs a man, stepping closer to the scene. "I don't know," replies another onlooker. "Looks like the cop's in trouble." As the first few people gather on the sidewalk, their curiosity quickly turns to confusion. Some pull out their phones, recording the strange sight of a coughing, disoriented police officer with his young partner awkwardly standing nearby, clearly unsure of what to do. "Sir, we need to call for help," Tom pleads, panic in his voice. Grayson waves him off weakly, still unable to speak. His pride clashes with the humiliation flooding over him. He knows calling for backup would only amplify his disgrace. What if they find out I opened the trunk without cause? The thought looms over him, even as his body demands relief. The growing crowd begins murmuring among themselves. "Did he break into that car?" asks a woman with a grocery bag slung over her arm. "Looks like it," replies a man beside her. "Bet it didn't end well." More people approach, their phones now trained on the scene, capturing every detail. Tom shifts uncomfortably under their scrutiny. He feels the weight of their eyes on him and his fallen partner. And then, from the edge of the crowd, a tall man emerges. His confident stride immediately draws attention. Dressed impeccably in a crisp shirt and blazer, his presence commands respect. Those closest to him begin to recognize his face. "It's him," someone whispers. "That's Antonio Harris." Harris, a well-known former senator and now a presidential candidate, walks toward the scene with quiet authority. His calm demeanor contrasts sharply with the chaos surrounding the disoriented officer and the buzzing crowd. When Harris reaches the car, he takes in the scene with a quick, assessing glance. He notices the trunk slightly ajar, the tear gas still faintly hanging in the air, and Grayson coughing on the ground. His expression remains composed, but his eyes narrow slightly. He steps closer to the car and stops just short of the struggling officer. "Officer," he says in a steady, deliberate tone, "would you care to explain what's happening here?" The crowd falls silent, their attention fixed on the interaction. Grayson lifts his head, his red, swollen eyes barely able to focus. He knows the voice, and when he sees the figure standing above him, recognition sinks in. It's his car, Grayson realizes with a sinking feeling, and I broke into it. The officer struggles to form a response, but the words catch in his burning throat. Instead, all he can do is rasp, "I suspected something." Harris tilts his head, his calm gaze unwavering. "You suspected something," he repeats, his voice even, but with an unmistakable edge. "And for that, you decided to force open my trunk?" Grayson's humiliation deepens. The crowd, now fully aware of what happened, begins to murmur again. "He really tried to break into Harris's car?" someone exclaims. "Unbelievable," another voice mutters. Harris glances briefly at the onlookers before turning back to Grayson. His composure remains unshaken, but there is steel in his voice as he adds, "This car is my property. I'd like to know what justification you had for tampering with it." Grayson coughs again, unable to respond. Behind him, Tom looks increasingly uneasy, wishing he could vanish into the background. The crowd grows bolder. "This is outrageous," someone shouts. "They're supposed to serve and protect, not harass people like this." Harris raises a hand, and the murmurs quickly subside. His quiet authority commands their attention. "Let's keep this civil," he says, his voice calm but firm. "I'm sure the officer has an explanation." Grayson looks up at him, the weight of his actions crashing down harder than the gas itself. For the first time, he begins to understand the gravity of what he has done, but the worst is yet to come. The crowd thickens around the scene, their murmurs growing louder as they process what's happening. Phones are raised high, capturing the unfolding drama. Some are here out of curiosity, others out of frustration. The sight of a white police officer kneeling on the ground, his face reddened and eyes swollen from tear gas, has sparked a mixture of disbelief and anger among the onlookers. Antonio Harris, the tall, composed figure now standing at the center of it all, surveys the situation. His car, a sleek black sedan, stands with its trunk slightly ajar, the cause of all the commotion. His gaze lingers on the struggling officer before sweeping over the growing crowd. He remains calm, though his expression is serious, his posture commanding respect. "Officer," he says again, his voice measured and deliberate, "what exactly were you doing with my car?" Grayson, still coughing and wiping at his face, struggles to respond. The realization of who stands before him, a prominent black presidential candidate, makes the moment all the more harrowing. He knows every word is being recorded, every gesture scrutinized. I suspected something suspicious, Grayson rasps, his voice barely audible through the pain in his throat. Something suspicious? Harris repeats, his tone steady but carrying an unmistakable edge. He steps closer, the faint trace of disbelief and controlled anger flickering across his otherwise composed features. So, let me get this straight. You decided to break into my trunk because you suspected something? The crowd stirs. Voices grow louder. He had no right, shouts a man from the back. This is harassment, plain and simple, another adds. Harris turns slightly toward the crowd, lifting his hand for silence. The murmurs subside, though the tension in the air remains palpable. Behind Grayson, Tom, the younger officer, steps forward hesitantly, his face pale. Sir, we were just trying to ensure everything was in order, Tom says, his voice trembling slightly. We didn't mean to. Didn't mean to what? Harris interrupts, his gaze now fixed on the younger officer. Didn't mean to break into my car without cause. Without a warrant. Tom falters, unable to find the words. Grayson, regaining some composure, cuts in. We were following protocol, sir, he says, his voice still hoarse, but firmer now. We thought there might be something illegal. Harris's expression doesn't change, but his eyes narrow slightly. Protocol? He repeats, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. He folds his arms across his chest, his posture radiating quiet authority. Tell me, Officer Grayson, does your protocol include forcing open private property without evidence, or is this a judgment call you made on the spot? Grayson hesitates. He knows the truth, but saying it out loud would only worsen his situation. The cameras are still pointed at him. Every second of this is being documented. Harris takes a step back, his voice now louder as he addresses the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he begins, his tone steady. What you're witnessing here is not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a larger problem, a mindset that some are entitled to act however they please, without regard for the law, without regard for respect, and without regard for who they're targeting. The crowd reacts with murmurs of agreement. Today, it's my car. Harris continues, his voice growing stronger. Tomorrow, it could be your home, your family, your rights. This is about more than one officer's actions. It's about accountability. Applause ripples through the crowd and some cheer. Grayson lowers his head, realizing there's nothing he can say to salvage the moment. Tom shifts uncomfortably, wishing he could disappear into the background. Harris turns back to Grayson. His tone softens, but the gravity of his words remains. Officer, I don't know what led you to believe this was acceptable, but let me make one thing clear. This is my car, my property, and my rights you decided to ignore. You had no reason, no justification. I hope you think carefully about why you made that choice. Grayson doesn't respond. His eyes dart briefly to the crowd, then back to the ground. The crowd begins to murmur again, and Harris addresses them one last time. This isn't just about me, he says, his voice carrying conviction. This is about all of us demanding better, from our leaders, from our institutions, from each other. The applause grows louder, and more phones capture the moment. Harris, maintaining his composed demeanor, walks to the trunk of his car, calmly closes it, and turns back to the officers. I trust you'll find your way back to your car, he says, his tone dismissive. Without another word, he walks away, leaving Grayson and Tom standing amidst the murmurs and stares of the crowd. Grayson feels the weight of his actions pressing down on him, knowing this moment will follow him far beyond this quiet street. The next morning, the internet is ablaze with discussions about the incident. The video of a white police officer coughing on the ground, blinded and humiliated by tear gas, while Antonio Harris, a calm, composed black presidential candidate, addresses the crowd, has gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments, and an endless stream of hashtags flood social media platforms. This is what leadership looks like. One comment proclaims, "Imagine if the roles were reversed," another user writes, sparking debates. The footage becomes more than just a clip of a local incident. It's a symbol. People see it as a larger story about power, assumptions, and the misuse of authority. The narrative is clear. An officer acted on unspoken bias, and a man of integrity stood his ground. Meanwhile, at the local police department, the fallout begins. Officer Richard Grayson is temporarily suspended pending an internal investigation. He is instructed to deliver a public apology, a formality he performs with a visible mix of reluctance and humiliation. Sitting stiffly at a press conference, his red eyes and stiff posture betray his discomfort as he reads from a prepared statement. "I regret my actions and acknowledge that I violated protocol. I apologize to Mr. Harris and the community for any distress I may have caused," he says flatly, his words lacking conviction. But the public isn't convinced. Online comments and news articles quickly point out the insincerity of his apology. "Damage control," one user writes. "He's only sorry he got caught," says another. In stark contrast, Antonio Harris handles the situation with grace and purpose. Later that day, he holds a press conference of his own, attracting not only local reporters but also national media outlets. Standing before a wall of cameras, his voice resonates with calm authority. "This is not just about me or my car," Harris begins. "This is about a pattern, a system, and a mindset that allows certain actions to go unchecked. It's about the need for accountability and respect for every individual, regardless of how they look or where they're from." His words strike a chord. Social media platforms erupt with praise for his poise and leadership. People share their own experiences of being unfairly targeted, using hashtags like #TimeForChange and #accountability. Now, this man understands what we go through. A Facebook user writes, "Harris for president. This is the leadership we need," another declares. As the video spreads, so does support for Harris's presidential campaign. His approval ratings skyrocket, and he becomes a national figure representing integrity and resilience in the face of unjust treatment. For Richard Grayson, however, the incident becomes a personal and professional nightmare. Even after his suspension ends, his reputation is irreparably damaged. On the streets, people recognize him and whisper behind his back, "Isn't that the cop who broke into Harris's car?" Serves him right. A passerby mutters within earshot. Grayson starts to realize the long-term impact of his actions. Every decision he makes moving forward will be scrutinized, every step haunted by this one moment of poor judgment. The weight of public disapproval bears down on him, isolating him both at work and in his community. Harris, meanwhile, turns the incident into a teachable moment. At a campaign event weeks later, he addresses the crowd with his characteristic calm but firm demeanor. "We all make mistakes," he says, looking out over the audience. "What matters is what we learn from them. I don't believe in tearing people down, even those who have wronged me. I believe in growth, in accountability, and in the power of change. Even the officer who acted against me yesterday can learn and do better. That's what leadership is about, bringing out the best in everyone, even when it's hard." These words resonate deeply with those listening, solidifying Harris's image as a unifier and a leader committed to justice and empathy. The story concludes with a sense of hope and resolve. Antonio Harris emerges not only as a candidate for president, but as a symbol of resilience and dignity. His campaign slogan, "Time for Change," now carries even greater meaning, echoing through conversations across the nation. For Richard Grayson, the incident serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences of his actions. While he remains in the background of the story, his role becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked assumptions and misuse of authority. The public, however, takes the greatest lesson from Harris's response, that dignity, respect, and the pursuit of justice are the true markers of leadership.